I've lived in New Jersey my entire life, and I know lots of interesting people. Artists, musicians, actors, business owners, and politicians. So my goal is to introduce some of the most interesting people who have ties to New Jersey. Either they live here, they work here, they went to school here, whatever tie I can think of. And yeah, maybe they're not so famous, even in New Jersey. But I'm going to change that because I'm Lucille Losapio, and this is Not So Famous in New Jersey. In an effort to record the true, undramatized stories of African Americans, Juliana Richardson, 26 years ago, founded the History Makers, an archive of African American history. She and her team have interviewed literally thousands of Black Americans and their fascinating stories. The people she has interviewed run the gamut from admirals to astronauts, famous lawmakers and politicians like Julian Bond, Donna Brazile, and Barack Obama. She has preserved the stories of African Americans in the arts, in science, in the media, in entertainment, in the law. The stories that these people tell are incredible, but so is Juliana Richardson. Maybe even more interesting are those who refuse to be interviewed. Juliana was honored by the Rutgers Living History Society with the Stephen Ambrose Oral History Award for her work with the History Makers, which is, by the way, the largest effort to record the African American experience since the WPA Slave Narratives of the 1930s. I was lucky enough to get her to agree to speak with me for this podcast. This interview took place a couple of years ago, which will become obvious from our conversation, but I think you'll appreciate everything she has to say. The History Makers is such an incredible Black oral history organization that I am guessing that most Americans haven't heard of it. I hadn't heard of it until you were given the Rutgers Living History Society Oral History Award. Can you give us just a little bit of history about how the project started and what made you decide to build it?
Well, the project started 24 years ago, actually. We really started doing interviews. And that year we did about 70 interviews, mainly here in Chicago. I think by the end of 2020, I was interviewing Julian Bond, civil rights activist Julian Bond, who was a member of SNCC. And, had been chair of the NAACP. How the project began, there are two beginnings that I talk about. One is when I'm 9 years old in a small town in Ohio called Newark, Ohio. My father retired from the service and we moved from this coal mining town called Duquesne, Pennsylvania to Newark, Ohio. And so, there were only two things we studied about Black people. One was George Washington Carver, and my teachers, she said he could do all these things with peanuts. And then there was slavery. So my 9-year-old brain could not compute that he could have done all these things with peanuts when all we had been were slaves. And then the other seminal moment with that same teacher was that she asked us to talk about our family backgrounds one day. And my classmates, they were, as kids are, very eager to tell their stories. And they were part German, part Italian, part French. And I'm literally cowering over in the corner because I don't know exactly what to say. And what I do know is that this is before James Brown, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So I either maybe said Negro colored. Then I said that we were Native American because most Black people think they have Native American in them. And then I said French because they were all, sexy. And I wanted to be sexy too. And so what happened is I knew that I had lied. And, I was taught not to lie as a young person. And I saw my teacher looking at me sideways.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling, of not being truthful and not knowing stayed with me until my sophomore year at Brandeis University.
Is that when you learned that your great-grandfather had been enslaved?
No, I grew up with Papa. So Papa was a fixture. By this time, his name was Davidson, and he had migrated to Duquesne, Pennsylvania when his wife had died in Georgia. And all we would hear was that Papa was a slave. And that's all I knew. And I knew you knew enough that you didn't ask them.
Yeah.
But you knew enough to say it.
It's funny that you mentioned that you said you were French because my mother-in-law always said she was French and that her last name was Marnell. And then after she died, I was able to get her birth certificate. I knew the day she was born, which was Christmas Day. And I knew it was going to be around 1915, 1917. And the only person named Catherine that was born on Christmas Day in any 3 or 4 years, she was Italian. Her name was Catherine Marinelli. back then, Italians weren't considered white. So it's funny how that you both picked French because that seems so, continental, I guess. Yeah.
That's right. I didn't even have that concept. My experience was this little town, and
Mhm.
you point to something, Lucille, that is also really centers the project. Is that I often say that the project is about identity and identity formation, and basically in telling the story about your mother-in-law. It was, what identity did she want to have? Because a lot of immigrants were either trying to shed their birth identity, and assume a new identity, or they didn't know, or they made something up, or, or life was hard and they were starting again. And so all those things play a factor.
So before you began this project, virtually the only attempt to ever capture African American history was from a first person perspective, was the WPA Slave Narratives.
Yeah, it was the only massive attempt, meaning that
Yeah.
between the years of 1936 and 38, there were 2,300 formerly enslaved interviewed as part of the WPA project. So that's what made it, but there had been no attempts since then.
So what value did these narratives give to your research, and how did they negatively impact what you were doing?
I never used the WPA slave narratives. I started to learn about them when I was doing research for my project. They're housed at the Library of Congress, Smithsonian Productions, and the Library of Congress had joined together. And later, I would say, like in the early 2000s, even Oprah Winfrey did some work with them using celebrities. But I didn't want to go by way of them sitting on a shelf. That's really, really important to the envisioning. But the thing is that scholars have used those, and genealogists, because they actually told what plantation and things people were part of.
Yeah.
But they're funny stories because there are instances where the same formerly enslaved person was interviewed by a white person, a black person, and they told totally different stories about, because they're trying to weigh their value, their opening, but they don't know who they're talking to.
In terms of your project, what is the most important outcome you hope to get from the project?
I'm giving voice to people. I'm centering the Black community in the American lexicon. It's really important, the 20th century, that the nation doesn't lose the Black experience in the 20th century, because essentially we go from coming out of Reconstruction, which the nation still does not know enough about or talk about.
Yeah.
To setting the stage for the nation electing its first Black president. I mean, if you look at the 19th century, except for countries like Haiti and some of the colonial countries, African countries, there may be an indentured state. So all Black people are coming out of enslaved states or indentured state, but the progress made and the institutions within the Black community, which are not known, our own school systems, our own communities and organizations that are just not known at all, is really important.
Well, finally, Americans are beginning to hear about events like the Tulsa race riots or the Red Summer in Bronzeville, Chicago in 1919. But most of these stories are still under the radar, especially for white Americans. So what do you think is the most egregious erasure of Black American history? Is the Tulsa race riot the worst, or are there others? Yeah.
No. I would say that most of what is in our archive is not known. That's what I would say. I would say that maybe the most egregious is the statement that was made to me by someone who was seeking this person to be a potential funder. And he told me that Black people had not done anything before the modern day civil rights movement.
Oh, my God.
So, I mean, think about it. I think it's the whole thing is that, that there's so little known. And not to say that people know everything. I think that I'm hoping that our project will be the template for uncovering other lost American stories. I mean, I could say the same thing about women. Women are not well recorded. We go from Jane Addams to Gloria Steinem with almost nothing in between.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've often heard that Anonymous was actually a woman. How likely is it that Anonymous was actually a Black woman?
Right. You never know. See, that's what I'm saying. You never know.
When I was in high school, I started reading books by Black authors like Eldridge Cleaver and Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Nathan Hurd. And I was learning things that I never learned in school, but I'm white. And I'm wondering, how different was it for you as a Black woman? We grew up in the same generation. The fact that I started learning about history that I wasn't told in school, I'm wondering how was it for you as a Black woman who grew up in the same generation to begin to learn things about your history that no one had talked about before?
Well, I mean, this is what I was saying, that as a sophomore at Brandeis, and I'm doing research on the Harlem Renaissance in New York Schomburg's library. I mean, you could have shot me out of a cannon. I mean, seriously, I was just extremely joyful because I don't have references for achievement. I only have the embarrassment of coming from enslavement and the people that were exceptional. I mean, I remember the people that I start learning about and the history that I start learning about that went back in the early 19th century. It was just like things I never knew. I mean, you think about when I first read about Paul Robeson, who's from Rutgers, and I can't believe that this man is learned and a football player and an activist and an actor playing Othello. And he's in college in this early time, and you see him in his uniform. And I really wanted to interview him. And he had been so disillusioned. And he was living, not talking to people. Even when I was pleading with his son, could I just talk to his father? These were larger in life characters that started to see as I started to unpeel the things about the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen. There were these names that started to be revealed. And you saw that people's accomplishments and what they were doing and their writings, and that all this world had existed, but I knew nothing about the world.
Yeah, all we ever heard about was George Washington Carver, like you said, and Crispus Attucks. I mean, we heard about him.
You know, but wait a minute. How were you learning? I learned Crispus Attucks, but being in Boston, I would say that what school were you in that you're learning these things that were different? You seem to be more knowledgeable than the
average
normal,
white person.
the average. I mean, because I think the most informed average white person may know about five Black people.
I know a lot of Black people that, in fact, when I was in college, I was actually more comfortable with the Black students I went to college with than the white students. I mean, it was fun. I went to Livingston College, which was a college at Rutgers, and 20% of our students were Black, which was huge.
I say that's huge.
Yeah. And I really think that part of the plan for Livingston was, let's put all of the Blacks, Puerto Ricans, and hippies on the same campus and let them fight each other. And that way we wouldn't have problems on the other campuses.
Because Rutgers acquired Livingston, right?
Well, Livingston was a college that they created.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, because when I was there, I was starting to learn about how they had grown or whatever.
Yeah.
The different.
Livingston College was a real experiment. I mean, there were no rules. You were an adult or you failed out, because there were no rules to make you do anything. In fact, the first couple of years, it was pass, fail, and honors. That were the only grades.
Wow.
And we had people like Toni Morrison taught there.
Oh, she did. Yeah. Wow.
We had incredible professors there that no one else had access to in the rest of the country. But Nathan Hurd taught a class. I took his class. It was a class on Black American writers. I was the only white student, and nobody else had ever heard of and I'm like, oh yeah, Richard Wright,
No, but that's why I'm saying you're learning as we're learning, because, and that's why I think the period of the 60s and 70s. It's an idealistic period, but we're starting to see the roots of people who will inform the rest of the 20th century.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious what you think. I mean, the country is so divided, and racism has become, people don't feel like they have to hide it anymore. It's okay to be a racist now. It's cool. Do you think that there's anything that these oral histories can do to remedy that? Or do you think that the MAGA Americans are beyond hope?
No, I don't believe the MAGA Americans are beyond hope, because the area that I grew up in is the heart of MAGA, is one of the MAGA centers. So no, I don't believe anyone's beyond hope. I think that unfortunately we're in a society that has become hyper segmented.
Yeah.
Along verticals, and there's less chance for people to get to know each other. And then you're being fed on social media more of what you already like or know. And that doesn't matter who we are, because if I'm watching this, I'm getting fed more of that.
Yeah.
So that's the only concern I have. I do want to say that I'm terribly frightened. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, and asked me about DeSantis, I would have said he wasn't relevant and that my work had begun before his. But that's before, there are 18 states that have passed anti-CRT laws. And it wasn't just the 18, it was when I started to learn the laws. You can't make a child feel guilty. These are hotbeds for just really McCarthyist behavior.
Yeah.
That where no one wants to be part of controversy. And so we're all taking this road. And so that I'm very, very concerned, because one group asked me to speak, and as it got closer, they asked me to keep my comments on the up and up. I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And they
don't
said,
make anybody feel bad. Yeah.
Don't call names. Okay. And then another one told me to take Black out of my title. And then another sponsor told me in the write-up for requests for funding, don't put Black or African American.
That's what I was going to ask you. If any of the funding that you get, if you ever get pushback from the people that you're getting.
We never, no, we haven't. But I mean, these are warning signs, because I'm like, I am a Black project. And then think about it. I lied that day because I feel like I did not have a history to call my own. Now I know my history, and I have to lie to say that I don't know the history, or I'm not what I am. And so it's like the most bizarre of this 24-year period, the paramount shift that we have. And I just think that part is not good. And it's frightening to me.
I just saw a meme on social media that Juneteenth is the first national holiday that you're not allowed to talk about in 14 states.
And that's real, because we cannot. I know for a fact in Arkansas, when we were trying to choose a faculty for our faculty fellows program, they couldn't teach it. And so our digital archive that they have, they can't really say they're centering their curriculum around our content. So that part is I find very, 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 very concerning.
Now, people can access your archives digitally, right? Virtually?
Yes. So what was important to me was that we combine state-of-the-art technology with video recorded interviews. Our interviews last, on average, 4 to 7 hours. The longest one in the collections are about 16 hours. We do what are called life oral history interviews. But Carnegie Mellon has worked with us, the university has worked with us for 22 years. The founder of what was at the time called Infomedia Digital Video Library, I refer to Professor Howard Weckler as my godfather. But he adopted us. He was one of the people in the country that were the beginnings of what we know as AI. And so voice recognition, object detection, all those things were the beginning part of his project that I asked him to adopt us, and he did. So technology and access are really important. So our digital archive, I'm very proud to say that like 7 years ago, we had no subscribing institutions. Now we're in 211 colleges and universities and public libraries. So Rutgers is one of them, and Princeton is another one. But we're really, really, really excited, and just need to maybe get the public libraries there. So anyone with a library card, they don't have to go in the library. They can access it, and it works really well on your iPhone. I do research all the time. You can just put in a subject, and it'll take you every place that it's mentioned. I'm hoping there will be discussion groups and things like that. In our section, we interview people, but we're really interested in their lives. And so we're learning about the communities that created people, the institutions that they were shaped by, or they shaped their careers, career pathways, just all the things. So we can guarantee the inclusion of the Black experience in the American pantheon in a broader, real context. Not just, it's not fictionalized.
Right. So who was the most surprising interviewee?
Lots of interviews have elements of surprise. I often tell this story about Colonel Thompson, who I was going to his interview and thinking in the early days, why am I interviewing Colonel Thompson?
And who is Colonel Thompson?
Colonel Thompson was a Tuskegee airman.
I hate to leave you hanging here, but you're going to have to wait till part 2 comes out to hear the rest of her story and some other really fascinating stories. Where else can you hear scintillating conversations with interesting people with ties to New Jersey except for here? You can't, and that's why you should subscribe and listen to every episode. I'm Lucille Osapio, and this is Not So Famous in New Jersey.